Hello, everyone. Hello, hello. Happy Tuesday. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. You are definitely in for a wonderful time with us for this next hour and a half. Today's webinar is entitled Supporting and Scaling Latine-owned Businesses. We will be talking about all things wealth building with our panel of three heavy hitters. So thank you again for joining us. We'll give people about 30 more seconds as people trickle in onto the platform, and then we will kick things off. Okay, we have more people coming in, and that number is going to continue to go up, I'm sure. Happy Tuesday, and welcome to Supporting and Scaling Latine-owned Businesses. Today's topic is wealth building. We love to talk about wealth building here at Prosperity Now. My name is Olivia Harp. I am the program manager for network building here at Prosperity Now, and I'm here to get you settled, get you acquainted with the platform before we jump into today's discussion. So just a few housekeeping guidelines. This webinar is being recorded, so you will definitely receive the recording within a week from today. And while you are muted to ensure sound quality, you do have a questions box. So we definitely want you to engage us in the questions box. Share your stories, comments, ask any questions that you may have for the panelists as we go throughout today's discussion. We definitely want to hear from you. And if you experience any technical difficulties at all whatsoever, please email us at gotomeeting@prosperitynow.org. So we know that people are joining from across the country and even across the globe. So I don't know what the weather's like. I know it's getting a little chilly here in the DC area. So we definitely want you to get comfy, try to stay warm and cozy, and join from a quiet place, just so that you can focus on the content and soak up everything that we have for you here today. You can grab a coffee. And I know it's morning time over on the West Coast, so grab a coffee, a snack, settle in. It's lunchtime for many of us, so just get really comfortable. Again, engage us, use that questions box to share what you're thinking, share what's on your mind, and also ask questions as we get closer to the Q&A segment. And everything that we do here at Prosperity Now, we do for you. We want it to benefit your work. So please reflect on ways that you can apply today's learnings to your own work. So right now, we just want to get a better idea of who is in the room. So we're going to launch a quick poll just to see who's in the room. So the question right now is, which category best describes your role? So our choices are entrepreneurship, policy and advocacy, research and development, community engagement or direct services, or media and communications. And so this will not only help us to get to know one another, but also let our panelists know who is in the room, who is here. Well, so far, because we know that more are going to join the party as we keep going. Okay, let's take a look at those results. Okay, so we have a lot of community engagement and direct services in the room, and that makes a lot of sense, especially as we're talking about wealth building and making sure that you're making an impact with the lives that you come into contact with. And then, of course, we have entrepreneurs and business owners in the room given today's topic. And we have a nice mixture of policy and advocacy as well as research and development. And you are going to love what we have with a part of our presentation, because we are going to dive into the data for a short time. So thank you so much for participating in that poll. Now I am going to hand you over to today's facilitator, Abigail Golden Vasquez. She is the Senior Fellow for Strategy here at Prosperity Now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Hispanic Heritage Month program supporting and growing Latine-owned businesses for wealth creation. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name's Abigail Golden Vasquez, and I am a Senior Fellow for Strategy at Prosperity Now, where I focus on entrepreneurship as a means to wealth creation for low and moderate income individuals and historically marginalized entrepreneurs. And I also bring an important Latino lens to Prosperity Now's work enterprise-wide. Can you advance the slide, please? Prosperity Now's mission is to ensure everyone has a clear path to financial stability, wealth, and prosperity. Our motto is, until our economy works for all. Slide, please. So again, thank you for joining us for this timely webinar featuring 3 outstanding experts and practitioners who you'll be hearing from later, but I'm going to introduce them now anyhow. Arturo Cáceres, CEO of the Latino Business Action Network, known as LBAN. Emi Reyes, CEO of the Latino Economic Development Center, LEDC. And Daniela Senior, founder and CEO of Colada Shop. I put the S on there, Colada Shops, because she has several of them around the DC area, as well as several other DC area ventures that she's engaged with. We are so excited and happy to have them with us today. A quick note on terminology. You've probably heard several terms to describe people who are descendant from or coming from Latin America and the Caribbean or Spanish-speaking countries, such as Hispanic, Latino, and the more gender-inclusive Latine or Latinx. I use Latino and Latine interchangeably, so that's what you're going to be hearing from me throughout this conversation. We are highlighting Latine entrepreneurs today, not just because it's Hispanic Heritage Month, because Latinos are the largest ethnic group in the country, starting businesses at the fastest rate of any racial or ethnic group. Despite this outsized new business creation, the overwhelming majority of Latine-owned businesses start and stay small. Don't get me wrong, this is not because Latine entrepreneurs are lacking in any way. There's plenty of research documenting how Latinos, like their Native, African, and Asian American brothers and sisters, face structural barriers that prevent them from accessing capital, corporate and government contracts, and important door opening and resource networks that could enable them to turbocharge their businesses and generate wealth. This is important because the ability to build wealth has generational consequences in lost opportunities to own a home, to go to college debt-free, and more, not just for Latinos, but for all Americans. If Latine-owned businesses were able to scale similarly to non-Hispanic white-owned businesses, we would see trillions more dollars flowing into our economy. With Latinos making up nearly 20% of our population today and projected to be 1 in 3 Americans by 2060, it is not hyperbole to say our shared prosperity as a nation is disproportionately rests on Latinos' ability to prosper. In this webinar with our 3 outstanding guest discussants, we'll hear what the research and data is telling us about the state of Latino-owned businesses and the major challenges and opportunities they face. We'll consider the unique circumstances of Latine entrepreneurs and the types of targeted interventions required to ensure their ongoing success, and we'll explore the ecosystems of support needed to ensure Latine-owned businesses not only survive, but flourish. Our goal is that for each of you who've joined us today, that you'll walk away with a clearer understanding of Latine contributions to the business landscape and the tremendous resiliency Latinos show despite structural barriers and other hurdles. The types of policy changes, narrative change, and other actions needed to build wealth through entrepreneurship for Latino households, communities, and the country. And how you can be better prepared to serve Latine entrepreneurs in the work that you're doing. So without further ado, Arturo will kick us off with some data and research, and then we'll dig right into the conversation with all 3 panelists. We'll have approximately 40 minutes of conversation, followed by Q&A and a closing. So with that, over to you, Arturo.
Thank you, Abigail. Thank you for that. It's great to be here. Love the work that Prosperity Now is doing, and just grateful to be a partner with you all and the other panelists that we'll soon be able to talk with. So let me just take a few minutes to go through an overview. For people out there in the audience, LBAN is a nonprofit. We partner with Stanford University. One of the three things that we do within that partnership with Stanford is we do research on Latino business owners across the US. It's the most extensive research on Latino business owners, and we've had now 8 consecutive years of issuing a report, an in-depth report on that research. So I'm going to cover some of that today and other research that we pulled together. The narrative is more important than the actual data and details. We have pages and pages of all that research on our website, and we'll put a link to that later for those that want to go into it. So if we could advance the slide, I'll go right into it. So first I want to talk about the Latino opportunity. So most of us know, if we can advance to the next, about the growing Latino population. So Latinos are already 65 million people. One of the ways to consider that in context, in 1980, we were 14 million people. In 27, 26 years from now, we will be over 100 million. That's preordained. No matter what happens at the border, most of the growth is now driven internally within the country. But we also obviously will care a lot about immigration, because most of us have a very direct connection to that experience. Although some of us are the descendants of people who have been here since before it was America. So in that that's rather unique about our population. We're in some ways the original people and also the newest people. But even those of us that are the newest people to this country are probably the closest thing that our country has to the original pilgrims, people that come here just with a desperate hope to build a better life for their children. So our population is growing. We're 65 million. If we could advance to the next one. The next growth factor on top of a growing population is that we're getting older. So we are still the youngest population in this country, but we are getting older. Our average age now is almost that of a 30-year-old, the median age for Latinos. That's much younger than it is for the white population. Also, though, it's older than we used to be. In 1980, our median age was under 20. And so now, rather than being an adolescent, which is mainly consuming, this larger population has now a larger percentage of a larger population that is in the productive phase of their lives. So there's a lot more Latinos now that are producing than there ever were. So that's the second growth factor. If we could advance. The third growth factor is, over the last 30 to 40 years, Latino education levels have been increasing. In aggregate, this is sometimes muted because the newer arrivals will, on average, not always, but on average, come in with lower education levels. But what we can see over the last 30 to 40 years is that the children have much higher education levels on average than the parents. In fact, Latinos show the biggest increase in education when you compare the children to the parents. This has a lot of great benefits for our population, mostly that we now are going to college in much greater numbers. The number of Latinos in colleges has more than tripled in the last 20 years. The growth for the country has been less than 50%. Without Latinos, it would have been something like 30% growth, versus a tripling almost with Latinos going to college. That means that Latinos on average make more than their parents. And again, Latinos show the biggest increase of income levels when you compare the children to the parents. All of this is great. It means that even though we're still underrepresented in schools, even though we're still underpaid, there is tremendous growth happening within our community, more than just the population, which is growing and that everyone can see. we are ascending, and that is creating a massive Latino tsunami across all aspects of our country's culture and economic. Every sector of the economy will be driven, the growth will be driven by Latinos going forward. Next slide. How that looks when we look at entrepreneurship. So if we think about it, we are 65 million people today. Again, we're still undereducated, but moving up, right? But those 65 million people already represent an economy of $3.2 trillion. This would be the 5th largest country on the planet. So US Latinos already still being undereducated and underpaid already represent one of the largest economies in the world, bigger than every country of Latin America, Africa, Asia, and Europe, with the exception of only Japan, China, Germany, and the rest of the United States. The US Latinos are already of that size, right? So you can only imagine how much bigger this is going to be going forward. What that means for entrepreneurship in the last 12 years or so, Latino business ownership has increased by 34%. There's 34% more businesses owned by Latinos now. In that same period, the white-owned businesses have declined. There's 7% less white-owned businesses in this country. In terms of revenue, if you look at the last 3 years, which includes the 2 years of the pandemic, white-owned businesses grew in aggregate over the 3 years only 9%. And that's understandable because of the pandemic. The pandemic hurt everyone. For Latino-owned businesses, however, they were still able to grow 25% in those same 3 years, which included the pandemic. Now, there was a lot of turmoil for Latinos during the pandemic. Many businesses did go, weren't able to make it. And in part, Latinos are doing a lot of the businesses that were hardest hit. But what we did see is that there has been an amazing bounce back of Latinos after the pandemic. So there's just a strong dynamism within the community that these setbacks hurt, and they hurt bad, but somehow, some way, Latinos find a way to come back. And so we're seeing that in the numbers. In terms of jobs, Latinos are creating jobs at almost twice the rate, or just more than twice the rate of white-owned businesses. So Latino-owned businesses are actually creating more jobs, which corresponds to the faster revenue growth as well that they're showing. Another interesting data point is that jobs at Latino-owned businesses pay better benefits than jobs at not Latino-owned businesses. And that's probably because we are closer to sort of the working class and closer to understanding the needs of the workers, because a lot of us come from that background. And so we intrinsically are doing things to create jobs that are addressing the kinds of benefits that employees want. And why this matters for our community is a Latino business owner on average has 9 times the wealth of a Latino that does not own a business. And so this is one of the best ways to close the wealth gap, is by supporting Latino businesses. We quantified this opportunity and Abigail touched on this, if Latino businesses, if the only thing that they did, now mind you, they're growing faster and better than white-owned businesses, but if the only thing that they were able to achieve would be to reach parity, to reach the same size of a Latino-owned business, that would be an extra $3.3 trillion for the US economy. That's massive. This is one of the largest, if not the largest, opportunity for our country, is to enable these Latino-owned businesses to continue growing as they've shown that they can. Next slide. So now a little bit on the challenges that we see. Again, our research, we don't want to sugarcoat things. If you're a Latino business owner, Latina business owner out there, your life has probably been rather hard. And that's because the situation for Latino and Latina business owners, probably not that dissimilar from African American business owners, and perhaps even women business owners might share some of these same challenges. But a Latino business owner, even though their business can be growing faster, and even though the business has better credit ratings, they will still be 60% less likely to get a bank loan. That's a huge gap. It's so big that it's more than just Latinos not being familiar with financial terms or how to present their business. This does point to what Abigail suggested: structural and implicit biases that happen within the financial services sector. But by far the biggest capital gap that Latinos face is in venture capital. This is much worse than even the gap that they face getting loans. Our research shows 19% of the more than 5 million Latino-owned businesses are already trying to beat tech companies. They're in tech, they're selling technology, or they're based on technology. But yet less than 2% of the venture capital is going to Latino-owned companies. This year is probably even worse, right? Because whenever there's a retraction in venture capital funding, it's typically Latinos, African Americans, and women that get hurt the most because of this sort of, there's unfair risk associated with those populations. And so this gap is something that we see as one of the biggest things. It will become a self-fulfilling prophecy that Latinos are not in tech if we don't address the funding gap. The final of these big gaps that we see that could make a huge difference for Latino businesses to grow is the access to contracts. And especially when we look at federal contracts, Latino-owned businesses get contracts 31 times smaller than a white-owned business on average. So that's a big issue. In the private sector, it's a little better. The gap is only 3x versus 30x, but that's still a sizable gap. And so those are the three major issues that we see that can keep us from this $3.3 trillion growth opportunity for our economy. And this is just when we quantify the Latino opportunity. Some of these same issues, if we were to deal with them, would also enable African American business owners and women business owners. It really is the largest opportunity for our countries to figure out how to address some of these barriers. And so with that, I'll hand it back over to you. I just wanted to give people a backdrop on the strength we see in Latinos and as well as the challenges that they're facing.
Thank you so much, Arturo, for providing that grounding in that context. I particularly appreciated your acknowledgement that when we do these things to improve access to capital for Latinos, when we address these structural barriers, that there's actually an opportunity that the benefits accrue to everyone. And being at Prosperity Now and working on, trying to address these wealth gap across different race and ethnicity, it's important that we're doing this for all of us, not just for one group. So we're focusing in on Latinos today because it's a group that's very often not talked about in depth, but this is something that we care about deeply for all historically marginalized and underrepresented entrepreneurs and other groups. Okay, so with that, I'd like to invite back Emmy Reyes, the CEO of Latino Economic Development Center, and Daniela Senior, from founder and CEO of Colada Shops, to join us for the conversation.
Hi there. Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. I see that we have another poll that just popped up. So let's hang tight. And you want to run the poll, Olivia? Okay, so this poll is, in your opinion, what is the greatest challenge that Latinos face in scaling their businesses? Access to capital, access to contracts, access to networks, or all of the above? And we have I guess all of the above never made it on there, but that's okay. Access to capital wins resoundingly, followed by access to networks. All right, thank you so much for participating. All right, now we're gonna delve right back into the conversation. So I'm gonna kick us off with a question for the group, and whoever feels inspired to answer first, feel free. This first set of questions are going to be for everyone. So what are some examples of structural barriers that you see in your work, or in your case, Daniela, that you've experienced that impede Latine success, despite their tremendous resiliency and entrepreneurialism?
Well, I think Arturo, in my case, touched upon it pretty clearly. Is access to capital, I think, ultimately takes the win there. It's, very much a struggle to access capital. The terms of that capital, just even getting your foot in the door as a Latino, Latina, Latine, whatever we're calling it. But, I think, and then you add also, if you're a woman to that, that also then I think doubles down a little bit as well in that case. So I would say that's definitely in my book wins right now, and it's a constant battle. And the crazy thing is that there is a lot of money out there. It's just not being a lot. It's once you kind of see it and where it's at, it's just the people controlling this money. Also, I have to point this out, are mostly white males. And that is why also primarily the funding is going to white males. So that's just something to keep in mind when targeting and understanding who you're dealing with, because that's also, I would say, part of the strategy as a Latino business owners, understanding who you're getting capital from. So, and finding ways to find a common ground. Yeah.
Maybe making the case for more non-white capital providers out there.
100%. So
I don't
like,
want to put words in your mouth.
No, 100%. I've been actually on a very strategic search for, as we were in the process of scaling our business and trying to find more growth capital, and being actually very strategic and trying to find people of color and women that are actually in these VC environments, as well as like private equity. And there's not that many, especially in the women's route. And, I would say people of color, depending, I haven't found a lot of Latinos yet, but, there's definitely immigrants in there, but it's still a very underwhelming amount, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Emmy, do you want to chime in? Do you have any specific examples, maybe?
To your point earlier about which is the biggest struggle, it's all of them, right? When we talk about capital, it's not just money, or even access too, because the reality is that any business owner can go online right now and get a payday loan by the end of the day. So it's access to good capital that is the struggle there, right? They are getting denied to, as Arturo highlighted, banks are denying them at much higher rates for loans over 50,000. And so then they have to go through alternative means. Oftentimes, if it's an emergency type thing, they go to payday lenders, either because they don't know CDFIs exist, or the CDFIs take too long and they need the capital quicker. And so there's various reasons why they're not able to do that. I think additionally, oftentimes they don't have the mom and dad or rich uncle that is able to be that initial investor in their idea. And so that's just something they don't have access to. I think when we talk about structural barriers, I think with the first round of PPP, what we saw was if there's not intentionality behind these products and ensuring that BIPOC entrepreneurs get access to these resources, they get left behind, right? We saw with the first round of PPP how many business owners of color were just not even close to getting access to a PPP loan. It wasn't until the second or third round that they were able to participate in that program. And that's because there wasn't that intentionality at the start of it. I think the other thing when we talk about lack of access to procurement opportunities, the structural barriers there is that oftentimes those take a very long time, and business owners don't have time to manage their day-to-day business and be working on procurement opportunities that can take 6 months to a year to achieve. And I think Arturo sort of might have mentioned in their study about how Latinos spend more time on these procurement opportunities than white business owners. I think it takes on average a year for them to be able to go after these opportunities, and then they win them, and it can take months to be paid by government funders for those projects. And so entrepreneurs have to be able to manage covering operating expenses for months until they receive those payments. So when we talk about the structural barriers, it's sort of in the private sector and as well as the public sector, there's just so many for them to have to navigate.
Thank you for that. And I think later in the conversation, we'll start to look at solutions too, but that's some really good context. Arturo, do you want to add anything on the structural barriers, specific examples?
I would underscore like what Emmy just covered. Our data shows it at that level, right? On an individual level, it's hard to point at like this was structural or implicit bias, right? Because it's hard to assess. But with our research, we look at thousands, and that's how we conclude that these gaps are much deeper than just a little training program that might fix it, right? It's looking at the structures of why this is happening to thousands of Latino-owned businesses, and then extrapolating, where that could be. But I think Emmy hit it right on the head.
Okay.
And Abigail, one more thing that like Emmy's conversation sparked on my end. It's also, as also Arturo mentioned, like we are a very young population in this country, and we do not have the generational wealth yet built. And that has a very strong impact on also our businesses because, as Emmy alluded, like we just don't have those like elder family members that we can reach out to and have that built into our businesses, but also student loans that are also getting paid off and things of that nature that, counterparts don't necessarily have at the same rate. So, and with that also the access to the networks that brings, because also that's, something that takes time. And that also I would say is passed on with time, from generation to generation. It's just not only your immediate family, but what's surrounding us with that. And that has also a huge impact.
Yeah, thank you so much. I don't think we can underestimate the power of networks to serve as door opening and, introductions to potential contracts or even subcontracting. It's something that we don't talk about as much as I think we should in this space. I'm going to rewind one step because I was so excited to get right into this conversation, and we had the whole poll on capital that I just jumped right in and did not allow you guys each to have an opportunity to say a little bit about yourselves, to introduce yourselves and talk about how you're coming to this conversation today. And I think it will give some even greater context to the different answers that you all each just laid out to the question. So I'm going to start with Emmy, and then I'm looking at my screen and I'm going to go left. So Emmy, why don't you kick us off? Tell us a bit about you, how you come to this conversation, LEDC, etc.
Sure. Thank you. So Emmy Reyes, CEO of the Latino Economic Development Center, which is a nonprofit CDFI headquartered in DC. And we operate in Maryland, Virginia, DC, as well as Puerto Rico. And our organization really focuses on that financial empowerment of the communities we serve. And we do that through housing education, providing tenant services, affordable housing preservation efforts, financial education to get people anywhere they are in that journey to home ownership, as well as small business technical assistance and small business financing. So as a CDFI, we do provide SBA and non-traditional lending opportunities. And during the pandemic, we really grew to start working more with local partners in creating more equitably based grant programming. And so during the pandemic, we established a new department called Direct Community Investments that worked primarily with local funders to ensure that the grant programs that were coming out as a result of the pandemic were really reaching the people that most needed it. And so in the last 3 years, we just crossed a big milestone of celebrating $100 million dispersed in the last 3 years. And that was all to homeowners and entrepreneurs in the DC area that really needed those programmings more. And I'm very glad to be able to join this conversation. I think that when we talk about how do we ensure that the services we're providing are really targeting and meeting the needs of the people that we serve, I think in part for us, it's that we hire local staff that are very familiar with the community that we're serving that have experienced that. I myself am the daughter of an entrepreneur. It's why I knew I didn't want to be an entrepreneur. So kudos to Daniela and those that choose to go down that path. But I saw firsthand the struggles that my father had in maintaining the restaurants that he operated, how the system sort of failed him when he most needed it, when it came to access to capital and resources and education that he needed. And so I feel very fortunate to have spent the last couple of years at LEDC and ensure that our programming really grows and meets the needs of the community that we serve. I will highlight that, in our mission statement, we talk about the fact that we really want to help our community be the leaders in the communities that they serve. And so we don't just give them tools and education, but we help promote however we can that their desire to give back to their community. And so I'm very excited to be joined by Daniela Senor, because I think she embodies everything that we hope our clients and our entrepreneurs are able to do in the communities that they serve. So I'll pass it over to Daniela.
Thank you so much, Emmy. You're amazing, and the Latino Economic Development, also an incredible organization, which I've been very fortunate to have used for growth of my businesses. So I'm Daniela Senor, or Senior, whichever you prefer, and I am the CEO and founder of Colada Shop, as well as Serenata in La Cosecha Market. So I have businesses in DC, Maryland, and Virginia. So we have grown Colada Shop. We have currently 5 locations open, 2 under construction, and then have Serenata as well. I'm an entrepreneur since I was born, I would say. I think that my first business I had when I was in 2nd grade, but my official first business I started when I was 13 years old and kept it until I went to college, and that was in my home of the Dominican Republic. So I am an immigrant. I moved to the United States when I was 18 and into the DC area in 2010. I was fortunate to work with some incredible people, including Chef Jose Andres, that gave me a lot of mentorship and support in my career. And then I was able to shift again to entrepreneurship. And that's when I started Colada Shop in 2016. Colada Shop is an all-day Cuban fine casual restaurant, and we focus on what we call our 4 C's, coffee, cooking, cocktails, and Cubanism. And that Cubanism aspect refers to the Latine hospitality that we all know, and welcoming people to our home. And that's what we do internally and externally, and do focus on hiring intentionally a lot of Latinos in our restaurants, and not only hiring them as line level employees, but also helping them build their skill sets and education so they can actually grow in our leadership positions, which to me is key, a key thing really as to what we're discussing here. Yeah.
Thank you, Daniela. So what was that first business in the Dominican Republic?
Well, in 2nd grade, I was selling stickers at lunch. But at 13, I started a home-based catering company. And actually, by the end of that year, I had 6 employees. It was actually it became quite a big operation. And yeah, my parents didn't know what to do with me. And they're like, you just took over our entire house. And yes, yeah, so it was kind of funny.
Fantastic. Thank you. Arturo?
Yes. So yes, I mentioned we're a nonprofit. We partner with Stanford. The research is one of the things that we do that I talked about already. But the other thing that we find is really helpful for us is we run a business scaling program at Stanford for Latina and Latino business owners. So it's a program we created with Stanford faculty, and the people who go through it will get a certificate from Stanford. But we recruit Latina and Latino business owners for this program. It's 9 weeks hybrid, so that they have to continue running their businesses, but they have to come out to Stanford a couple times during the program. And the whole thing is about how to help them think about scaling their business and then putting all the resources around that. And we do this twice a year, about 150 companies, everything from startups to not startups. We'll have everything from restaurants to manufacturers to cybersecurity. It's amazing to see how they connect with each other. We recruit from across the US and Puerto Rico. People will come into it with, Latinos are big tent people, right? Latinos can define themselves any which way. Some might not speak a word of Spanish or Portuguese, and others might have been very recent immigrants from Brazil or Mexico. And the way they connect, even though one might be running a restaurant, another one a cleaning business, and another one a tech company, it's amazing. And to me, it's the most powerful thing for us to witness is to see these people come together and how they support each other. So the third thing that we do in addition to this business scaling program is we continue to support this ecosystem around them. Once they graduate from our program, they stay connected. We do a lot to facilitate the connections between them and with us. And we now have about 1,000 plus that have gone through the program already. And it's amazing to see that network and all the people around it. So we invite everyone to join us in building what we call the ecosystem that Latinos deserve. And so everyone that we invite are in particular the capital providers. So we spend a lot of time building relationships with the banks and venture capital firms, also CDFIs and others, so that they can understand better this community, the way that we see them, the way that they are. And also others, any kind of mentors, supporters, organizations that are community building organizations, Prosperity Now. I mean, we will partner with everyone who shares the idea that they want to support creating this ecosystem for Latinos and Latinas. And so for us, we do those three things. I'll put share the link in the chat. If there is a Latino business owner out there and you're interested, please check out our programs on our website. Reach out to me. We'd love to have more people from the DC region. We already have a good alumni base there, but always looking for more we want to have representation of the whole country. And so would invite anyone to, if you're interested, please reach out. We'd love to consider you for our program.
Thank you for that, Arturo. I've been working with Arturo and LBAN for quite some time, even before Arturo, actually. And really, it's an amazing program. And there's not that many programs out there that are actually focusing on the scaling piece. And I think that is really pretty important since so many, as I mentioned earlier in my comments, so many new businesses are started by Latinos and other entrepreneurs of color, actually. And so many of them are relegated to staying small. And so I really want to explore the piece of like getting to scale. And we were talking about ecosystems of support, Arturo, and so I would just like to build upon that a little bit more and just really hone in on what are some of those supports that are needed precisely for the scaling piece, and with an eye to building and creating wealth, but also those that are sort of unique to Latinos. So you can talk to any entrepreneur, and they're going to say, any group, and they're going to say, access to capital is my biggest problem. Yeah. Right, so we know that specifically, but if we start to really try and drill down into how does this play out for our different Latino communities, and I always like to just, and I'm going to say this once and only once, but I always like to say it, we are not a monolith. Latinos are very, very, very diverse. We come from many different kinds of cultures, backgrounds, countries, with different language. And as Arturo said, some of us were here before there is a here as we know it now, and some are more newly arrived. So there are a lot of different experiences, but in your serving of the diversity of Latinos, what are some of the things that you have seen and that you've come across that you could point to are unique to Latinos? And then for you, Daniela, what have you experienced too uniquely as a Latina entrepreneur from the Dominican Republic, an immigrant to the U.S.?
Yeah, so I can start with I think that there's a unique. Everyone talks about the ganas that Latinos have and the resilience, and I do think that even when I consider like my own parents, and you ask any Latino about their story, you don't have to go back very far to hear just amazing achievements of overcoming privations that are, most of us, would cower at, right? And I'm just grateful that I don't have to face the same conditions my parents were able to navigate. And I think for a lot of Latinos that we can all think about that, and that probably propels us to overcome whatever we're facing now, right? And so we have that in our community. But I don't want to normalize that, because I think there is a lot of trauma associated with being put in these extreme severe situations of poverty and privations. And what we should want is more to build a society where our children don't have to work twice as hard for the same amount, or don't have to be perfect and aren't allowed to make the normal mistakes as anyone else's children. And we should build a society so that all children have that kind of an opportunity. What we have seen specifically with our program in bringing all these Latino and Latinas together for the 9 weeks, in every single time we do it, it's amazing to see how transformative that experience is when they walk into the room at Stanford with the professors at the front of the room. Something just clicks for them, that they see what it all means and also what they represent. And we teach them a lot about what's the reality for Latinos, not the stereotypical negative stuff that you're hearing, but what is the reality of who we are in this country. And then we try to get them to think about their own communities. We are great at building community. In fact, why we're ascending, why our children do better in school than we did, why our children make more money than we did as the parents, is because we have this unique ability to build social capital at a community level. We know often our home governments, if we come from outside of the United States, like I did, or even sometimes this government here, doesn't have our back. Sometimes they're trying to get rid of us. Sometimes our institutions are not, doing what they should for us. So we learn how to support each other, beginning with our families and then the friends of the families. And we build enormous social capital at the community level. We found that that was lacking at a professional level, in part because there weren't that many Latinos at the professional level until now. It's starting to change now that a lot more of us are going to college. But also, with that perception of scarcity, it probably conditioned us not to connect as Latinos in these professional settings. And so what we see in the program, when they're all together and we build on this idea of them supporting each other, it's just amazing to see how they come out. And I think for them, it's because while it feels very strange, because most of them have never had that experience at a professional level with other Latinos, because they just haven't been in that kind of a network, it's also very familiar to all of them. It doesn't matter if they're a new immigrant or if they're the descendant of someone who's been here for 400 years. It's a Latino situation that they're all used to. You build community, and that feels very familiar to them. And one of the very concrete things we saw during the pandemic is in that first wave, as Emmy was pointing out, it was terrible for Latinos. The first wave of PPP loans was terrible for Latinos, African Americans, anyone, right? Even white businesses struggled badly. But when we looked at the data, we could see that only about 30% of the white-owned businesses in the first phase that applied got it. Only less than 18% of the Latino-owned businesses got it. So a much lower number of the Latino-owned businesses got the PPP loan. For our group, it was 82%, not because of what they learned at Stanford in our program, but because they helped each other. They were connected. And so when they started getting rejected, they started talking to each other and reaching out to each other, reaching out to us. We could see the traffic. We have a platform where they can communicate with each other. And you could just see them all sharing information, teaching each other who's giving out PPP loans, who's helping, who's not, who to avoid, how to answer this question. It was crazy wild to see how they did that. And all we did was try to support them, and we created webinars around it and programming around it. But that's why they were so successful, because of that network. And I think in the poll, access to networks was mentioned as one of the things. And I do think for our community, because so many of us are either first-gen college or recent immigrants, those networks are crucial. They are crucial. And so what I would recommend all Latino business owners, even if you're not part of LBAN, find a Latino network somewhere. It might be the Hispanic Chamber, it might be other community organizations that can aggregate other Latino business owners together in community with you, and it will be powerful.
Thank you. So the power of cohorts and networks at work. Anyone else, Emmy or Daniela, do you want to chime in? You, Emmy.
Yeah, I think when it comes to scaling, I think Arturo really highlighted some of the main things there. Often when I think about how we help our entrepreneurs scale, I think about Daniela specifically because she was able to grow to multiple locations. When I think about why that was successful for Daniela, well, apart from her being incredible, but why it didn't work for other entrepreneurs, it's because they didn't have the same access when it comes to technology or understanding of that. They didn't have those social networks, didn't know what resources or a community to access for support when it came to PPP and things like that. I think part of it is also many people weren't eligible for PPP because they didn't have their personal finances in order, much less their business finances in order, and so they weren't able to participate in that. I think that's where it shows the very importance of CBOs, that we can't just give capital without technical assistance.
Sorry to interrupt, but CBOs, can you define that, please?
Oh, community-based organizations. Thank you. But I think it highlights the importance of us providing technical assistance in addition to capital. And when I mean capital, just financial, but there is also that social component of it. It's putting more entrepreneurs in these cohort models where they're able to build that network. Most of the cohorts that we try to launch has very similar networks. So we'll put food entrepreneurs together so that they really learn from each other. To Arturo's point earlier about entrepreneurs of color not being allowed to make mistakes sometimes, it is very important for them to learn about each other's failures and to know that CBOs will be there present to help them navigate that process. I think at the onset of the pandemic, many entrepreneurs needed assistance with deciding whether to close or stay open and sort of what that looked like for them. Many risking putting their home, taking another mortgage out, and like really helping them with deciding, is that the decision that's in their best interest when it comes to their financial well-being, apart from just their business. So I think that it is very important that, since we were talking about who's in the audience, I know that it's a lot of CBOs and that work with entrepreneurs, but really ensuring that we prioritize that technical assistance and helping them build that social capital that's necessary for them to scale up their business.
Great. Okay. So we often hear about the missing middle. I'm going to keep pushing on this scaling piece, right? So there's, Daniela said there's a lot of capital out there. It's just hard, to get it. There are a lot of organizations, community-based organizations, CDFIs, and micro lenders who are serving entrepreneurs of color at the early stages. And then it kind of seems to drop off. So can either of you here talk about that and tell me what your experience is with that, if you've seen that, and what needs to happen to address it if indeed that is a problem? Maybe it's not, but in case that it is.
I'll actually, I think, start and speak from my personal opinion because, as was alluded earlier, to start the business, you either, start with your own funds or friends and family around, or maybe take a small loan. But as you are scaling, getting to a point, there is actually very little investment done this in between round, right? I'm finding people, let's say venture capitalists sure, I'll write you a $20 million check. I'm like, I do not want a $20 million check. I don't want to give you my business. That's not what I want. I want money to scale, right? And I also can't put all that money to work immediately. So why would you want to give me all that money? And I think that's also a piece that needs to be addressed, is not necessarily the terms of that money and what that means and what that really means for your business, because there's also a lot of businesses that fail when they take that money in, not really understanding the responsibility of that money and the pace of the return that needs to happen, or ultimately that, you know, the responsibility to those investors when they go even to a potentially larger sale. So I think that in between of actually having access to capital to grow and continue to grow the business, in my case, like since we've opened, we've reinvested every single dollar, right? We haven't taken dividends out. It's all been reinvested into growing our business and opening locations, which is very capital it's very capital intensive. And, you know, that also at times, you know, when talking to traditional banks, you know, they're looking at tax returns. It might look, well, you have a loss. Well, no, I've been building the business. So I have like a ton of construction going on, but, you know, all of our businesses, you know, flow into one corporation. So you have to have your story very straight, right? And your facts to be able to communicate what you've been what you've been building, what you've been trying to do, and really try to access the right capital. Because from my experience so far, and I feel like I've talked to a lot of VCs, PEs, like banks, and this middle ground is very tricky to navigate, but also very crucial. And I think I think there's a few firms now that are trying to tackle, and they're seeing the whole, like, how do we ultimately help these businesses go from, you know, 5, 6 locations to 15 or 20, which is the next stage usually. Like, you know, the VCs are usually looking in my area, like, hey, you have 20 locations open or $20 million in revenue, which, you know, we're still far from, but it's that how do you go from 5 to 20? You know, it's like large in comparison to a lot of business, but still very small to really access that institutional money.
Yes, thank you, Daniela. That's great. So how do you ESOs on the call? I mean, how do you do that? Where do you go? How do you find it? You said you found a couple that are out there. Emmy, do you have like a pipeline? Do you graduate people to the next level? You know, Arturo, are you working on this in any fashion as well to fill that missing middle gap?
So our program is targeted at that middle range for that reason, right? Where we do see that's the crunch period. So we shared our data with Bain Capital. They augmented it and then they issued a report. And one of the things that it showed is that Latino businesses grow better and faster up until about $1 million in revenue. And then after that period, that's when there's a greater chance for Latino-owned businesses to die, like to not get until they get beyond a certain point. And it's that middle that Daniela was referring to, that they were conjecturing it's around access to capital in that space. So what we do know also about Latinos is, was mentioned by Daniela and Emmy, I believe, we don't have as much wealth in our families to begin with. So we need to go to these other sources of capital. We're not going to have the rich uncle that will say, okay, I'll take $1 million risk here and help you get through that difficult middle period. We're going to have to go to professional capital. And if the terms of that professional capital are not good, then that could impact our profitability and make the business less viable. So that's what Bain conjectured. And when I was talking with the researchers as they were putting the report together, and they were conjecturing that that's what's happening in that middle phase, is they're not getting the right kind of capital. It's making them less productive. So our programs at Stanford are all about putting them in this cohort so they help each other and they support each other through that, because in that cohort, we will have people who have scaled. There'll be companies that are doing $900 million of revenue a year with a company that's doing $2 million of revenue in the year, and with a startup that has $1 million in financing but no revenue yet. All of them have a different scaling problem, but all of them can learn from each other, and they do. And so we can't be the experts in all industries, but we know that we can connect them to people within the network, who other Latinos and Latinas who have done that, or have some thoughts about that, or have seen other people do that, and they'll say, okay, I'll introduce you to so and so. And when you get a warm introduction like that, it goes a long way, because now that person, you can trust what they're going to tell you as well, right? Because sometimes they're just trying to sell you something, or but if it comes through a trusted vehicle, then you can make a better assessment of, okay, yeah, I can do that, or I don't want to do that. It just greatly lowers the risks. The other thing I want to come back to, though, is this point of, we had to create an ecosystem that embraces failure, that allows our people to fail, because that is how you get the most creative and the most growth. All experiments are, you fail a bunch of times before you succeed. Now, as a business owner, you don't want to go through that kind of trauma every time failing, but someone whose business didn't work out, if they learn the reasons why it didn't work out, they're a much better investment the next time around. And that's what's happening for a lot of white business owners. They are given a second chance, and then they're able to scale much faster because they've learned a lot. And we have to create that kind of environment for Latinos and African Americans and others who are always asked to be more perfect. Then you're more willing to swing for it, right? And say, well, okay, let me try for that, because even if I fail, I can get back up. I'll learn from that. I'll get back up, and then I will scale this. So to me, that's part of scaling. Part of really creating that growth is creating that ecosystem that will be that supportive of Latinos, where they can now take those bigger risks.
Thank you. I appreciate that, because I'm always a little weary of promoting scale too much, because I know that can be the thing that could push an entrepreneur over the edge. And if they're over leveraged on their own house, it could be devastating. And so I think, both giving the permission, but also making sure that there are some sort of wraparound supports and a community to help if that were to happen. I'm going to ping pong over to Emmy again and make sure you get a chance to talk about your perspective on this. But also, you're doing a lot of work in Puerto Rico, and so I want to ask you to share how that might be somewhat different than, you do work in Baltimore, you do work in the DC, DMV as we call it, the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia area, but also in Puerto Rico. So if you could chime in on that. And then I just want to let everyone know we're going to open it up for questions after this. So please have your questions ready, and we'll dig into that after Emmy finishes. Thank you.
Yeah, I think to the point of the missing middle, I think CDFIs, especially national CDFIs, have been doing an incredible job of trying to invest in that middle and provide loan capital and products that really meet that need. I will say that the difficulty in that is that it feels that the sort of next level, you mentioned whether we help people graduate, that next level criteria keeps changing. And so the bar keeps rising, right? So as before, banks might have said, we want to see that $2 million mark. Well, now it's higher, right? And with the current rate of inflation and the direction it's headed in, banks become even more sort of constrained with their funding. And the difficulty that CDFIs or CBOs that are serving or financing small business owners right now is seeing that the capital that we use to lend out is also coming more expensive or more difficult to obtain for CDFIs. And ultimately that ends up trickling down to the entrepreneurs themselves, right? And so it's just that middle, I think, is growing rather than trying to, or really getting more people to graduate to that next level, because the criteria keeps changing. But I will say that in terms of the markets that we serve and the differences, it is very much for me, I think in the DMV area, which DC, Maryland, Virginia, I always forget that when I say DMV, people think where they go get a license. But When it comes to serving the DMV, I think one of the important things for organizations to think about is that the barriers or the borders that we use to determine our services is not the borders in which entrepreneurs operate in, right? We have many residents that live in DC but operate in Virginia or vice versa. And sometimes I think that one of the things that we forget is that we as organizations providing technical assistance and financing need to be cognizant of the different barriers that people have in being able to obtain contracts outside of the borders of which they have historically operated or live in. I think when I think about Puerto Rico in specific, one of our main priorities there is ensuring that as Hurricane Maria funding is starting to finally sort of really get released, there are new opportunities that have simply never existed in Puerto Rico, while simultaneously there are certain policies and legislating making it easier for mainland residents to go open their own businesses or expand their services to Puerto Rico that don't necessarily benefit the residents of Puerto Rico itself. And so one of the main roles that we have as an organization headquartered in DC that supports operations in Puerto Rico is that of an advocate. And so what we do is try to ensure that when the EDA, Economic Development Agency, announced the very first economic development zone in Puerto Rico, which was near Ponce, the southern part of Puerto Rico, that capital was really going to be used for mainland residents and mainland businesses and entrepreneurs. And that's sort of the role that we play there is that of advocate. We are also launching our very first incubator in Puerto Rico that will be based or focused more exclusively on entrepreneurs within the tech industry. As Arturo mentioned earlier, right, tech industry is where Latinos receive even less venture capital, despite 19% of them being in tech, right? I think it was less than 2% receive that venture capital investments. And the reality is that there are certain sectors that lend themselves to certain kinds of capital, right? Debt-based capital for a tech industry may not be the best thing. And so CDFIs aren't able to provide much of economic assistance there. And our role there becomes in connecting them to those VC firms that have a commitment to investing in BIPOC businesses, specifically in tech. And so it's really one of those things that in Puerto Rico, we have to figure out ways to navigate those complexities, the realities of the environmental occurrences that happen there. And so they're navigating all of the mainland struggles that entrepreneurs face, in addition to even greater structural barriers that prevent them from sort of equally accessing the programs that are launching on the island. And so what's exciting though is that I think that there's record investments being made in Puerto Rico at a federal level that hopefully will continue to sort of play out over the next couple of years. And CDFIs on the island is something that prior to the pandemic, I think there were 3 of us. There are now many CDFIs serving Puerto Rico as more cooperativas, which are like credit unions here, have achieved the CDFI certification and they're able to expand their services there.
Thank you. Okay, I'm trying to see if we have any audience question here. Oh, here we go. While I agree access to capital is certainly a challenge, this often speaks to finances. Can you speak to capacity issues? Can you speak to capacity issues that our businesses face as possible solutions that you've seen or recommended? Do you want me to repeat that again? Oh,
no, I think I was able to read it there. I think when it comes to the capacity issues, if what that is sort of alluding to or speaking to is the idea of whether they're able to take on this additional capital and then use that money in a way that really invests in their business. I think part of the issue is that we underinvest. And so an applicant may come requesting 100,000 and lenders will often just give them half of that request. And half of that request oftentimes doesn't meet the needs of the businesses. And so underinvestment can really have an even more adverse effect of having given them nothing at all, because then they're sort of forced to go and look for additional resources, or they can only half launch an initiative or half open that business. And it just elongates the construction process of opening that brick and mortar, whatever it may be. But I think for us, one of the things, and this speaks to what I said earlier about the combination of technical assistance with that and really assessing what they may need. One of the initiatives that we try to do is we provide the general technical assistance, but sometimes alternatively, what we will do is subsidize the cost of legal advice. Sometimes people need better sort of order of operations for their business, or modify their legal entity, whatever it may be. And so we'll subsidize the cost of meeting with a lawyer or the cost of meeting with an accountant. Sometimes it's just connecting them to the right sort of advice and guidance that they need to expand their business.
Thank you. Anything else to add? No? Okay. Hold on. I know there was another question.
I see the next question is related to our credit score and if that's a barrier. And definitely, I think what's great right now is that many institutions, not just CDFIs, but also some banks, are starting to experiment with alternative credit models. I know many CDFIs are starting to look more at sort of their rent payment history and looking at their bank statements more deeply and seeing that cash flow, understanding that many of these businesses are more cash based and sort of what that means for them. Oftentimes Latinos don't necessarily deposit all of that cash because they use more old school methods of savings. And so it's really helping them navigate that part of it. I think fortunately we're seeing a big push to change how credit scores are determined, and or not just that, but what impact that has on credit decisions.
Yeah, I would add that our framing of it is not from any deficiency within Latinos, right? So there is the challenge of we have more immigrants in our population, and an immigrant might not have as much official credit ratings here, right? Because they're an immigrant, they don't have maybe a history of employment that's as long as others. And some of those things can affect why the credit rating scores might not be comparable. But one of the things we do when we compare to see the gaps is we're comparing Latinos who have better credit ratings and yet getting the bank loan 60% less often, right? So there's a deeper issue than that just, okay, some Latinos might need help with their credit rating, right? Not because they're deficient, but just because of circumstances of how credit ratings are created and the things that qualify for that credit rating, which, as Amy pointed out, a lot of financial institutions now are beginning to explore. Hopefully they all will do things to look at the situation more deeply, because when you look at this population, it is credit worthy. Latinos work and they pay off those loans. They kill themselves literally to pay off debts. So loaning to a Latino is probably the best thing you can do.
I agree.
Yeah, they're going to return the money. And so to me, we're very careful to always put that framing on it, that too often we internalize these gaps as deficiencies within our community, that somehow we're not good at finances or we're not as good at this or that. And all people need more education, all people need more information, all people, including Latinos, can use all of that help. And we clearly try to provide it in the work that we do, but always through that framing of we're trying to help Latinos overcome the extra challenges we know they're going to face because the broader ecosystem is deficient, not them.
Okay. And I've found some alternate sources of lending that don't, these are more specific to brick and mortar, not only hospitality, but brick and mortar service oriented businesses that are not taking into account any credit history at all, but rather like the sales. So they're connecting directly to your POS systems and your sales and basically taking a percentage daily, but you're not going through the full underwriting. And not only underwriting from obviously your credit score, but also as a personal guarantee, which I know some people are very hesitant about sometimes. They're really making their decisions based on your sales and what's coming in. It might not always be at the best rate, but so people do need to be careful, but that is an option that was not available even a couple of years back. So it's worth noting.
No, I appreciate that. I think there's a lot of attempts, maybe not enough, maybe we need more, but in the ecosystem, I think there are a lot of attempts to look at alternative ways of looking at credit worthiness, whether you pay your bills on time, whether you pay your rent on time, the receipts that you have coming in are just some of the ways that I've heard about. And the other, of course, in the more medium growth phase are just alternative equity investments, ones that don't dilute minority ownership. And so there's a bunch of creative ways out there that we should just continue to keep an eye on. I also want to continue to invite people to ask their questions, but while I'm waiting for more to come in, Daniela, earlier in our conversation, you had talked about the importance of policy, and I just think that policy is an important item for to be addressed across. And so I just invite any of you to talk about what are the policy changes that you see need to happen to better serve this demographic, specifically Latino entrepreneurs?
Yeah, absolutely. So from my case, something that definitely the pandemic just highlighted in a great way was how there are so many immigrants in this country paying into the system, right? They're paying their taxes. They are supporting whole industries, yet they have no safety nets. And going back, not only being able to fail, but ultimately the system failing them due to a citizenship or legal status. But there's no real policy currently in place that ultimately builds or rewards that hard work and people doing the right things and doing, paying their taxes, doing the right things, building a path to citizenship, right? It ultimately goes down to how many lawyer fees you can pay if you get a little bit lucky, and policies that value our immigrants' contributions and build a path to citizenship or at least legal immigration status. It's crucial for the growth of the Latino community, because God forbids you've been working and all of a sudden you get sick. There's nothing in place. There's very, very few things happening in the background from a legal and policy standpoint that support that community, and it's actually pretty sad to see, and I think it's something that we really need to push for to see more support towards our fellow Latino communities to make sure that we have those safety nets built in, but also that their valuable work is being rewarded.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Emmy, I'm going to push a little more deeply on the issue of, and Arturo as well, on uniquely serving Latine communities. So what are some of the very specific, nuts and bolts things? So do you have to approach language differently? Do you provide your services both in Spanish and English? Another thing is just, how you think about the, creditworthy is not the term I want to use, but like the potential for success. So I recall early in my getting involved on entrepreneurship, there was a Latina who was creating a health app for women in Spanish, and she just couldn't get it funded. And I think there's a real misunderstanding or misperception on the scale of this market and the understanding of the needs. And so, Latino or Latina focused businesses that are geared to Latinos can also be overlooked sometimes when someone who's not in the know might not capture the market. Can you speak to either of those issues?
Yeah, I think in terms of how we provide the services, yes, we have to provide them in the languages and also in the space that people appreciate. So our offices are, we have an office in each market that we operate in, right? Except in the reality that many Latinos prefer that in-person interaction, that in order to be honest with you about their finances, that you have to establish that communication beforehand, right? Especially when there's a cash-based business, they're not going to share all the details with you on the onset. You have to establish that repertoire first before they feel comfortable sharing that with you. When we talk about like our culturally competent staff, it's understanding when you're looking at their statements how much they're sending back home in remittances, right? That's not going to change. Another financial advisor may advise against that or lower how much you can provide, versus like Latino underwriters or loan officers understanding the importance of that. And that's the one thing that you may not be able to shift. And the other is when you look at personal finances, right? Understanding the complexities of home ownership within the Latino community, right? There are people, immigrants, that because of their status, they'll save up the money to buy their home and then they'll put it in the name of their 16 or 18-year-old child. And then when that child is older and wants to buy a home, they're not able to participate in first-time home buyer programs because they've been a homeowner since they were 16. And so you need underwriters and loan officers of the community to understand that may happen, and that's not a negative thing, it's a positive thing, and helping them navigate that process and finding other resources that assist them. I think to your point about the specific entrepreneur, it's so important to understand the Latino base, the economic base that presents itself to be. Popularizing the data that Arturo's organization has shared is so crucial, I think, for technical assistance providers, for us to even understand. I think you often hear CDFIs and CBOs talk about not having a lot of data, and it is so crucial, the work that his group does, because it provides us with the data that we need to adjust our programming correctly, right, and modify how we provide our services.
Yeah, and what we try to do around that data now is to talk about it more as a narrative, as opposed to the specific numbers, which people can look at in the report. But often people's eyes will glaze over, or they won't they won't take away from it the right thing. And for us, what we want people to understand is that Latinos are a great investment. They're growing and overcoming. And all these metrics show that, but there are these big gaps around capital, both on the debt side and as well as the venture capital side, especially. But then also access to contracts, government and the private sector contracts. And then they could start looking deeper and examining. What we would want is everyone who has the ability to influence policies, practices, to begin to change something about how they do things, right? The ecosystem needs to improve, not just for Latinos, but for everyone else who's also being impacted by these issues. And it can, right? If we partner with as many financial services institutions as we can partner with. And I've been impressed with how they are trying, like, put it quite bluntly, if I'm a nonprofit, if I didn't get the support from them, I couldn't produce the research. And they happily support it, right? And then they use that internally to try to see what they can do, as well as to include us in other forums where they enable us to then go speak about this research to others, right? Because I think there's this sense of everyone that there's a big opportunity here for our country that we don't want to lose. Like, even if you're not a Latino, you should want to address these issues because they're going to enable this economy, which will benefit you directly, to be much bigger. The American economy will materially be bigger and better if we can deal with these issues. So we're doing a lot to try to socialize the data in a way that people could understand it, and then at their respective levels can use it either within their companies for these large corporations and how they procure, or the government in terms of policies. But even a loan officer might examine their own implicit biases, because those implicit biases are hurting the bank's bottom line, right? We know that they're making loans to people that are higher risk as opposed to Latinos. And that's probably happening when it comes to other people they perceive as high risk, like African Americans and women, right? And so there's a lot there for people to take, just, you know, in understanding the data and at least trying to engage with it at their level to do what they can. Then within our community, what we try to do a lot of is to make sure that even us, we Latinos, are understanding who we really are, because we're not often taught that. And if we just rely on the media, it's often very negative framing of who we are. And so we try to also use our data to show that, while at the same time not sugarcoating it, right? Because I've been at Latino events and conferences, and everyone's talking about how great Latinos are, and we're all feeling good because there's a bunch of us in the room, and we're all feeling good that the Latino community is so big and rising and whatever. But when I look around, especially when I see some of the people that are like business owners or people that are early on in their career, Latinos and Latinas, their reality is quite different. They're struggling to get the promotion. They're struggling to get the bank loan, or they're struggling to get the investment. And they're struggling, they know, harder than they should be, because they could see their counterparts that aren't Latino making progress. And so then they're wondering, wait, then it must be me, because here I'm at this Latino event and everything's great for Latinos. And my reality is quite different. I see, you know, people around me doing better. It must be just me. And what we want Latinos to know is that no, it's not you. Like we are not deficient. Like our culture, there's nothing deficient about it. But the broader ecosystem has deficiencies that are impacting us and others. And now what we can do, you know, we can't change the policies that are imposed on us directly, because we don't yet have that access. Other Latinos who are in those organizations might be able to influence and should change those policies. But when a policy is imposed on us, we can't change it. But what we can do is figure out a way to overcome it. And the way we can overcome it is as a community, right? That we build these social networks at professional levels. And it could be, for example, a Latino alumni group from a university. It could be a Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. It could be any organization where Latino professionals are coming together, that you will be able to generate value for yourself to overcome these barriers. Because probably if people are talking openly in that network, you're going to find a lot of people share your challenges, that you're not the only one, that they too are facing those same challenges and figuring out ways to overcome it. And so it's like we would do at the community level, where, you know, Tia Lupe loses her job. Well, okay, at the next family gathering, everyone's trying to figure out how they help Tia Lupe get a job, right? You know, hey, connect, you know, go talk to this guy. Oh, I know this person over there. We if we're talking openly about the challenges, we're also going to find the solutions. And I think within our community, we have a lot of power to do that.
Thank you for that, Arturo. Okay, so we're going to have to wrap up soon. And so I want to ask each of you to share, in popcorn style, really briefly, one thing that you would like everyone who's watching, anyone who's watching or listening, to take away with from this conversation. What's the one and most important message you want them to take away with?
I can start. I would say perseverance. You know, it's sometimes we have to do the same thing day in and out, and sometimes it gets very difficult, and we just have to persevere, and remembering that growth is not linear. It's not going straight up. There is a lot of dips in there, and you kind of have to stick with it and find your community. And to what Arturo was saying, like actually in DC, we started the Latino Executive Network as a new platform, as well as for community at that level. And I think I've already seen a lot of things happen in these meetings of Latinos coming together. So make sure that within your own communities, you're reaching out and finding out who else is out there, because the power of community is huge.
Thank you. Emmy?
Yeah, I think for me, it is very important that we all remember that any of us can be advocates for these efforts, right? In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision, we're going to just getting started with the sort of hurdles that many of the programs that we've been managing or participating in are going to see a lot of pushback and questions, and some of those will be legal. And it is very important that I think as advocates and people in this ecosystem that we vocalize the importance of ensuring and prioritizing that all the programs that the federal government launches reaches the communities that we serve, that the importance of investing in BIPOC intentionally is very, very important. So for me, it's just ensuring that we make our voice be heard, that we don't settle for less, and just accept sort of what's coming, and sort of be ready for that pushback. Thank you.
Thank you.
I totally agree with that. I think that for me, it's about Latinos knowing that, yes, there are challenges. We are ascending and we have the power to continue to ascend. As we do that, as we grow bigger businesses or we get the next promotion, we will have increasing levels of opportunity to make change happen, to be advocates, but to actually change the policies around us at the organizations that we belong to, the communities that we belong to. And we should look around and not just assume, right? So are we hiring women and promoting them fairly? Are we doing the same with other groups that have been marginalized? To me, that is the huge power that Latinos have, is we can help America get closer to its original promise. We're that big of a community, and because we come from that history of privations that were unfair, we have the ability now to then use that to create a better society for our children and for everyone else's children.
Thank you so much. On that note, I just want to thank every single one of you. Let's thank Arturo and Daniela and Emmy for an absolutely invigorating and interesting and useful conversation with real action items that came out of it. I want to highlight the importance of networks and trust and capital, capital, capital. Olivia, over to you. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much for that. I know I speak with everyone on the call when I say that I got so much out of today's webinar. I definitely had my notebook on fire. So thank you so much, everyone, for this impactful learning opportunity. Really learned a lot. For those of you that are looking to make a difference right away, please feel free to join our advocacy center at Prosperity Now here, where you can reach out to a legislator and just start to affect change if you're just as inspired as I am coming off of this call. We also want to encourage you to complete our follow-up survey for this webinar so that we can make sure that we are serving you properly and as intentionally as possible. And we also want you to stay connected and sign up for a network. We have 4 networks here at Prosperity Now. My guess is that a lot of you will be interested in joining the Financial Security Network. So please, please click the links in the chat, stay connected with us so that you can be plugged in and tuned into our work and to future learning opportunities such as today. So again, thank you so much for joining us. We were really happy to have you this Tuesday afternoon, and we hope to see you next time. Have a great one.
Thank you.